Hey, everybody, welcome back to Inside Update, a show brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org. We're a nonprofit newsroom. We write about corruption in the state of Connecticut, and our goal is to get rid of it, not to support it. And today I'm joined by Catherine Revelo, investigative reporter, very talented transparency expert, and someone who has really thrown herself into the fight against stonewalling and blocking of information. I don't think I know for a fact, actually, she has not seen these yet. But I wanted to recognize her first. We attended the CT Press Club Awards last night, and Catherine was among those who won multiple first place awards, which got her one of these beautiful plaques here with a certificate. So, Catherine, first, congratulations on all of your recent wins here. Many more to come. You've been on a streak this last year and a half. How's your Thursday going?
It's going pretty good. I'd forgotten that award ceremony was last night. So
I know you were very much missed in person. I know it was Mark and Brandon and I, and there's a great picture that I'm hoping we will get sooner rather than later from the CT Press Club, which has all of us carrying all of the hardware from everyone just across the board. It was something like 20 awards, plus then the plaques were awarded for multiple first place winners. And I want to compliment every single one of our reporters because not only were we incredibly well represented there, but Inside Investigator was the only outlet that had a list in the program of multiple first place winners, and every single one of our reporters was on that list, which is a unique distinction, which is very cool. So anyways, positive news to start this episode. And I like starting on something positive because generally this is an episode that does require a disclaimer, perhaps even a content warning up front. We are going to be talking about how UConn and CSCU officials handle sexual misconduct allegations. Unfortunately, it's an alarmingly common topic in the state of Connecticut. And Catherine, this is the second investigation that you have released. The first one you also worked with Brandon on. This one is a solo piece. Tell us about Patchwork, your newest investigation on InsideInvestigator.org.
right, yeah. This investigation really focused on UConn because when we released the previous investigation, we didn't have any records from UConn. We only had records from CSCU, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about the years-long battle that we went through to gain these records and, really try to get an in-depth look at what happens when someone reports sexual harassment or sexual misconduct on public college campuses, how it's investigated, what disciplinary measures are taken, and, some of the broader fallout from that.
Yeah, I think we could safely say a slap on the wrist is unfortunately common. You could probably hear the frustration in my voice. And I do want to talk about the records battle. But before we get into that, kind of the procedural thing, can you talk a little bit about, I guess the outcomes of what's going on here? Because again, it does not seem, at least from my perspective, that there was a lot of accountability. Forget about the fact that it took years for us to get this stuff. UConn, as you said there, 17 months. We got nothing back from them. We had to fight to make that happen. But when we did get it, wasn't exactly a pretty picture.
Yeah, I mean, right. This is detailed in the investigation, but we looked at, I think, a couple dozen cases, and we did filter out cases where somebody was accused and there ultimately wasn't a finding substantiated against them. But in cases where a violation of either UConn or CSCU's code of conduct or other policies was found, we found 4 people total who were fired as a result of their actions. The much more frequent outcome was that, a professor or other member of staff would get a notification that there was an investigation into them and they would resign, often in good standing, which means that, if they're then turning around and applying to other universities for a position, there's, no notification or no notice or anything that this was pending against them. And we saw also multiple cases where, this was done so that they got a payout of, outstanding benefits for the year, things like sick pay, or, there were, stipulations in some of these resignation agreements that, retirement benefits wouldn't be affected. And we certainly did see a difference in outcome too by union membership. There were several professors who, even though they were found to be guilty multiple times of violating conduct policy at these schools, got, as you say, Connor, slap on the wrist. They were suspended for a few weeks. The longest suspension that we saw was for 1 semester, and all but 4 weeks of that suspension was with pay. Whereas members of service unions, which is a union that's not as strong as some of the professional unions and the the professors union, were much more likely to be fired. I don't want to downplay the severity of any of these cases, certainly, but, when you're talking about a single incident where you make sexual harassing comments, and the outcome of that is you're immediately fired, versus, this is happening in some cases over long periods of time, over multiple years, and you're just being suspended for a few weeks, there's a clearly disparate outcomes there.
Yeah, I'm going to quote from the first section of your investigation here, where you talk about serious breaches of policy, right? We're not just talking about like, oh, this is kind of a gray area. Was it meant a particular way? We are talking about physical touching without consent, pursuit of relationship between faculty and staff that's banned by university policy, retaliation after the rejection of romantic advances. I mean, these are not particularly gray areas. They're not also just kind of passing issues. And as you pointed out, repetitive. It's something that kept coming back up. And listen, CSCU, multiple issues going on. UConn, massive budgets, right? We have UConn crying poor in the budget process. We have CSCU going through their second chancellor resigning in disgrace in what, 8 months here, maybe less. These are organizations that have big problems in leadership. And I don't know if these are falling through the cracks or the process isn't there. But, as we look at this, there's a lot of paperwork, but there's not a lot of results. And I think that reflected, and where I'm going with this is the records battle itself. I mean, this was absolutely something that we saw play out. We talk about upstream and downstream quite a bit, or at least that's one of my favorite ways to describe kind of the cause and effect relationships that we see in corruption in Connecticut. But we had a huge amount of taxpayer resources, your money, dear reader, watcher, listener here, being invested into preventing us from getting these records in the first place. You talked a little bit about it. Could you just, now that I guess we can say it's in the rearview mirror, though I assure you continued requests will be going out in future years so we can continue to update that. We'll talk about money in a little bit. Talk to me about the records battle as you see it. And again, part of those systemic issues and seeming willful efforts to stop people from knowing about this nonsense.
Yeah, I think between the two of us, we filed 5 separate FOI requests to both UConn and CSCU over a number of years, seeking different records, using different language, targeting different offices, all in an effort to just, get these records, to get some sort of comprehensive picture of what's going on behind the scene. And we ended up having to go to the FOIC, which I think there was one minor thing we had argued regarding redactions that they didn't support. But other than that, they substantiated every single claim that we made, and also fined UConn for their response to this. But I think particularly the most egregious thing as it applies to this investigation, and I do mention in this investigation, is UConn actually went before the FOIC and argued when we had, looked at the initial records that they provided us and said, hey, there are things that are missing. There are documents that are referenced. There are attachments to report. We requested all records related to this stuff and you guys didn't provide it. And their argument before the FOIC was, well, we don't have to turn that over because the contents of those documents are summarized in what we did produce, which is obviously a ridiculous argument, and obviously flies in the face of the spirit of FOI. And, when the FOIC rejected that and they did have to turn over what ended up being, I think, several thousand additional pages of documents, we found things about the outcomes of these cases that were not captured in what they had turned over. So there's one particular case of a professor that we documented who was found to have stalked a PhD student who was under his department and for whom he was academically responsible, and we found, based on the investigation report that they initially turned over, we didn't know what the disciplinary cause was or what the disciplinary outcome was. We didn't know anything. And we got hundreds of pages of records related to this that, that showed that ultimately he's one of the cases who resigned and then went on to another university, apparently in good standing to, the rest of the world. And we found multiple other issues related to that, where things like grant funding was questioned. There was a restraining order that the student took out. There was a grievance process through the graduate student union that this student tried to bring against this professor. None of this stuff was mentioned in the documents that they provided, and it gave a lot more context into, what happens when these are investigated, what are some of the other issues, not to mention more of a voice to, the victim in these cases, because, they are pretty heavily protected by privacy laws, and we certainly don't have an issue with that. But, when we're requesting these documents, you are sort of missing that perspective if you're only getting things like investigation reports. So there was a whole wealth of information we were able to find that painted a much broader context about how contentious this case had been, that if UConn had been able to get away with just providing us with an investigation report, we never would have known.
I mean, it's also part of being a good investigative journalist, and, credit to you on that front. Can you imagine if you're like, oh yeah, every time I just get something in my email, I'm just going to take it at face value. That's the summary of the issue. Too bad. And then you report it out as truth. Like, that would be such a disservice to the people of Connecticut. It would be such a disservice to our mission. I mean, that's what makes, I would argue, advocacy journalism. That's what makes for biased journalism. If you're just taking things at face value, the critical thinking element of this whole newsroom. Yes, of course, we want to exemplify that internally. We want to, think deeper about the information that is provided to us, but we also want that for our readers, right? I mean, we want people in Connecticut, anytime that you see something in the news, I want you to be skeptical, not just, generally. I want you to be skeptical of us. If we aren't going deep enough, if you're curious about something, right, put it in the comments. We, there's only so many hours in the day, and we certainly, we get a dozen tips a day. And, it's probably the worst part of the job, is having to tell someone who, if we were just going to publish 250 word summaries instead of digging deeper, maybe we could get to more. But that's not what we do here. We want to provide comprehensive information that's useful and helpful and high quality. Man, this one really just grinds my gears for that reason. The audacity of an attorney making $187,000 a year that is taken by force from people who want to be informed, and then telling me that they don't actually even have to really do the job to provide the records. Get out of here. Like, that's exactly why these challenges are so important, why this work is so vital. And I also want to, take a second to call out and recognize the courage of those who did the work upstream, those who were abused, those who faced retaliation and unwanted touching in these horrible power dynamics while they're just trying to get an education. The fact that those folks stood up in the first place and reported it, sought accountability. I mean, whether or not they got it is, that gray area, or I would argue definitely did not happen in many, many cases. But I respect and honor the folks who took put their money where their mouth was and stood up for doing the right thing. Hopefully it saves more students in the future that this information is out there, and that professors should be terrified to sexually abuse students, because it should ruin their careers 10 times out of 10. So I want to make sure that we're understanding the other part of this which is money. Could you tell us more about, maybe go back to the CSCU stuff alone and tell us what you found there, and then all of this new information? Spoiler alert, that number got a lot bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, it did. And this is also tied into the fact that we couldn't get most of, the records that the FOIC compelled these universities to produce. Is, when somebody reports sexual misconduct or, any kind of violation of school policy to the investigative authority at these schools, right, it's handled by investigators. They do an investigation, they do things like interview people, and they produce a report that makes a determination about whether policy was violated. It's a little bit different when Title IX is involved, because Title IX involves a hearing where those determinations are made. But, once that determination is made, the way discipline is handled is by a completely separate authority. It goes to HR, it goes to management, it goes to, whatever academic department the professor or member of staff is involved in. And then the unions get involved, of course, and they have pre-disciplinary hearings, and that's where a lot of the discipline is determined. And so when we reported on this to begin with what we had received with CSCU, all we had was the investigation reports, which had, findings of, so-and-so violated the code of conduct, but we didn't know what the disciplinary outcome of those cases were. So we weren't able to, determine things like, had they been fired? And so all we could do was look at, open payroll records, which, by the way, are an absolute mess if you've ever tried to go through those. It's just a horrible interface to try to deal with. And take a look at, well, somebody stopped receiving a paycheck from CSCU or UConn on this date. And so I think we traced, it was, I think just under $1 million in pension payments that had been handed out to individuals at that point. And of course, the complication there is, not knowing whether someone or not is eligible to receive a pension, because, as our colleague Mark Fitch likes to point out, because of the way the rules are in the state, you could murder somebody as a state employee and still collect your pension as long as you're fully vested. So, not having outcome records and knowing if people were fired before they had reached that point, it was kind of difficult to know, have they just, fallen out of state service? Are they going to be collecting pensions in the future? We didn't know in a lot of those cases. But now that we have received additional records that include disciplinary outcomes and things like if people were fired, if they're still employed, if they, left in good standing, or if they entered into a stipulated agreement for certain things, we were able to track a lot more of those outcomes. And we found roughly $4 million, not only in pension payments that people are receiving, but also in salaries that some of these university personnel, including a couple of professors who have been found to have violated conduct policies multiple times, the salaries that they are still collecting. Right, and as you point out, that number is likely to get bigger over time as more people get eligible for pensions. It's also not a comprehensive understanding of exactly how much this stuff costs taxpayers, because we don't know things like what the costs of investigations are. For example, CSCU, sometimes if there's a conflict of interest, will hire an external law firm to conduct an investigation. And obviously there are costs associated with that as well.
Yeah, the internal, thousands and thousands of dollars that they spent just dealing with us to stonewall on this for multiple years. You mentioned this, and again, from the investigation, 8 individuals formerly employed at UConn and CSCU campuses are currently receiving pensions. 7 found to have violated school policy are still employed by the schools and collecting paychecks. So I don't know, if you're attending one of these schools, maybe look up your professor and cross-reference it with our investigation here, and be safe out there, folks. I mean, this is crazy stuff that you would have 7 people out there that, again, that slap on the wrist. It's corrupt. It's unacceptable. It is a massive problem putting kids at risk. all of the documents that Catherine and all of our team have fought for over the last several years are also now available in our FOIA library. It's a repository where we host all of the documents that we get via FOIA in the state of Connecticut. So, of course, listen, you might see something that we missed. You might just be curious to get the full story. This is a lengthy investigation, as many of our pieces are. And I can tell you that, we obviously just can't include every single story in detail. That could alone be a full-time job for a full newsroom, just dealing with sexual misconduct in the state of Connecticut, unfortunately. And those numbers, there's a pretty looking chart right at the end of this investigation. It's on the homepage of insideinvestigator.org right now. That has each of the names and each of the financial disbursements made by year. So you can take a look. And again, as Catherine said, the CT payroll data is not the cleanest. So she did a wonderful job bringing these things together into an easy to understand way, so you can actually take a look at it. This is live streamed. I just want to thank those writing in. Catherine, couple congratulations on your awards coming in from commenters. And also one person writing in here, business as usual, pointing out that this is happening, especially the pension eligibility. That's not just professors, right? Bad behavior does not mean that judges, for example, are going to lose their pension if they do something horribly, egregiously wrong. So something to keep in mind, right? This kind of corruption exists elsewhere. It's also corruption that we want to know about if it is happening elsewhere. Kind of my perennial plea for tips. I know I said we get a lot of tips. That's part of my job, sorting through what we can tackle, what we can't tackle, to make sure that our reporters' time is protected. We've had a couple folks saying, hey, can we get together for coffee before they give us any information? And I kind of want to, we have a few minutes left in this episode, just talk about our process for verifying tips, because I know it can be frustrating when people reach out and they're saying, can we spend 3 or 4 hours together going through my thousands of pages of documents? I really love it. The best tips that we get are often like a 500-word summary and then a few key documents that actually show us that you can back up what your claims are. We take those tips very seriously, and we want to provide honest guidance to folks out there as well about how to get our ear, how to get our attention. How do you get Catherine on the phone, right? It's going to be providing good information up front that she can actually get excited about. You've probably gathered this from hearing her talk, but is it fair to, say a pit bull might be too strong a word, but if you sink your teeth into something, you're not letting go. And I think I mean that as a compliment. It's one of the things that makes you a wonderful reporter, is that you're going to do the work to get a comprehensive understanding when good information starts coming in. What else do you want people to understand about Patchwork? Anything else that you want to chat about regarding that? And then we can just kind of talk about some odds and ends before we wrap up here.
Yeah, two other things I want to mention. One is I've had several people reach out to me, and I know you have too, about this kind of issue on private college campuses, and about FOI. Private colleges, unfortunately, not subject to FOI. So if you are aware of cases where that is happening, we would love to report on that too. But, we do unfortunately need people to come forward in those cases, because there's not a lot that we can do to try to get documents. So if people want to be, whistleblowers in this situation, if they want to come forward and be sources, again, like you just mentioned, summary of what the issues are, a couple of key documents, we would love to look more into that. The other thing I want to mention is the transparency update we released this week, which talks a little bit about some of the FOI issues that we faced, but also includes a list of documents that we've received in offices that we've targeted at these schools. Because over the last couple of years, I think we've learned a lot about what we need to FOI. And I will always maintain that a search for all records related to a topic is a perfectly legitimate FOI request, and it's usually the best language to use if you don't want to accidentally narrow something and miss something that you're looking for. But because we have had such a hard time With UConn and CSCU, what I've done is gone through the types of documents that we've received, and just kind of list them out so that, if you're interested in filing one of these requests and learning more about this stuff, there's some guidance there about places that you can go to get started so that you hopefully don't end up in the same situation that we did, where we had to go to the FOIC to get a lot of these records.
Such two incredibly important things. Yes, we want to hear. We know that we can't always get records just by requesting them. Some of our most powerful investigations have been about, private businesses where folks just had the courage to get us what we needed to get that comprehensive understanding. I say it, I guess, with a little bit of a laugh, because it's also companies and media PR managers who then say, "Oh, we don't want to comment." And we've talked with Mark on this show before about trying to control the narrative and trying to do brand management control. But good Lord, tell us the truth. That is always going to be the better way to handle an investigative journalist. Is going to have honest, transparent conversations. And man, I'm very thankful for your push on this. And to your point as well, transparency update, that has some very concrete guidance about how you can get involved in this, how you can help us get more information, and whether it is higher education or corruption in the judicial system, in law enforcement, criminal justice, family court has been one that is incredibly important, that we want more concrete tips, especially around the financial elements here. We'd be very interested in getting more showing how judges and others are self-enriching in some of these programs. We know it's happening, but we really need to nail down specifics in order to tackle these kind of things. And I think that's the 30,000-foot lesson here. Providing good information, narrowly tailored information that allows us to tell an important human story. Those are the kind of things that get us excited. And I know our reporting team really wants to put pen to paper at that point. Catherine, anything else generally that you want to touch on? Requests for tips on any particular topics? Otherwise, we can look to wrap up here.
No, yeah, I think I'll just mention, obviously, that, this is the second piece we've published on it. I don't think it will be the last. This is going to be probably an annual request we file at this point, just to keep an eye on these cases, see if there are any changes that get made, or if hopefully we see fewer and fewer of these cases coming forward, and more and more serious outcomes. And I think it's important that we update the financials that we've been able to track every year, just so that people have an accurate understanding of the fact that this does cost taxpayers money.
Absolutely. Money going out of your pocket, dear reader. Catherine, thank you for your work on this. I'll throw out a thank you to Brandon as well. He's been instrumental in putting all this together over the last couple years. Huge thank you to all of you out there watching, listening, tuning in, whether you're tuning in live or hearing this on the radio or watching later. We're a nonprofit newsroom, and that means that part of our commitment to excellence is accepting only voluntary donations to make this work possible. We don't accept money with strings attached. We want to make sure that we are upholding the highest ethical standards of journalism, and that comes with the hard work of bringing that into reality from a financial and operational perspective as well, so Catherine and our entire reporting team can do the wonderful work that they do. Huge thank you to all of our donors and all of you. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and until then, please don't be corrupt.